Breaking news in the last couple of minutes that the two-time Oscar-winning actor Gene Hackman and his wife, the classical pianist Betsy Arakawa, were found dead on Wednesday afternoon in their New Mexico home in the US. And the Santa Fe County Sheriff has confirmed that. They said, "We are able to confirm that as fact. We do not believe foul play was a factor in their deaths. However, exact cause of death has not been determined at this stage." And the longevity and the range of roles, quite extraordinary, coming back every single decade with another set of huge hits. I remember the Superman films very clearly. I was just looking through this list as well of some amazing films. Some perhaps might not have been the ones that are most critically celebrated, but Crimson Tide, I adore that film with Denzel Washington. Absolute Power with Clint Eastwood, another one. And the other one, again, you can see my taste in films here, it's more the blockbusters, but Enemy of the State as well, a great movie with Will Smith. But again, there's something for everyone there, the Oscar winners as well.
I think his enduring legacy goes back to, if we try to understand him growing up, you know, he was born in 1930. He enlisted in the army at the age of 16. He actually lied about how old he was. So, you know, a true master, even back then, of acting. And then he got his big break, I suppose, before all the big movies, meeting Dustin Hoffman at a local theatre, where he was able to make that first connection. But he's the people's prince, really, because of those different types of genres that he was able to master. He was able to gain such a huge audience, which I think has meant that he's had this lasting legacy.
And he had that sort of very intense presence on screen as well. He kind of really always stood out in the roles that he played, and that very clear voice as well. It always cut through. Born in January 1930, he was aged 94. And was born in California, and of course he and his wife were found in Santa Fe. Actually served in the Marine Corps briefly as well, US Marine Corps, before pursuing a career in acting, and is widely regarded as one of the great Hollywood actors, and you know, summed up by those awards that we mentioned: Best Actor for The French Connection in 1971, Best Supporting Actor in Unforgiven in 1992, 4 Golden Globes and 2 BAFTAs as well. A very impressive set of career accolades there.
And of course, a huge shock just ahead of the Oscars. And in his later years, Gene Hackman kind of shied away, really, from the spotlight, enjoying that quiet life with his wife, who he married in 1991. But as Hollywood wakes up and reacts to this news, it will be such a huge shock. There will be, I'm sure, a police investigation into the circumstances of this, and we will not speculate. But a huge loss, I think, to Hollywood. It's
massive loss, as you said, and as we mentioned, and as Leah just mentioned, the cause of death not confirmed, but big questions, given that, of course, as we mentioned, his wife, the pianist, Miss Arakawa, found as well with him. Let's just recap those headline details. That Gene Hackman and his wife, Betsy Arakawa, were found dead yesterday afternoon in their New Mexico home. The Santa Fe County Sheriff has said, their statement said, "We are able to confirm that as fact. We do not believe foul play was a factor in their deaths. However, exact cause of death has not been determined at this time." Gene Hackman, aged 94, and the two-time Oscar winner, enduring actor of titanic proportions, has died. And reading here that he retired from acting in 2004, which is striking to me because I feel like I've seen him so many times since. I think it just speaks to how those films that he has dominated so successfully keep coming back on. So many great hits from The French Connection, 1971, Unforgiven, 1992, the Superman movies, as we mentioned, in the late 70s and early 80s, Crimson Tide in the
Wow.
mid-1990s.
What an incredible backlog of
Extraordinary,
films.
extraordinary backlog of films. Matthew's joined us as well around the set to reflect on this extraordinary career that Gene Hackman had.
Yeah, I mean, the one film you didn't mention in that list of, as you say, extraordinary films is the one that my first exposure to him wasn't as a young child to the likes of Unforgiven, but was to the animated classic Ants. I don't know if you remember that from
I
1998.
do, yeah.
I remember that very well as one of the first sort of animated films I watched as a kid, and he played the Ant General Mandible. So that was my first exposure to him. But you're right, it just feels like, you know, almost that list of films, if you had to sort of write a list of iconic films, several of those would be in. From Bonnie and Clyde, I think he came to fame in the end of the 60s, Oscar-winning French Connection, and then, as I say, Unforgiven. I mean, it is quite amazing. And you mentioned the retirement in 2004. He actually became something of almost a recluse. I mean, he really shunned the spotlight. There were some amazing pictures of he and his wife Betsy just last year in Santa Fe. And I was reading, it was the first time that the two of them were pictured in public together for over 20 years. So they really did. They just, you know, he gave an interview in 2004. He said, "I'm done with acting." And they moved from LA to New Mexico. And it seems like they didn't really look back.
And he really hasn't been in anything since, because, again, I feel like I've seen him in
So
things.
he's narrated a couple of documentaries, but that's it. He certainly hasn't appeared as an actor in anything. And I think he gave an interview last year in which he was at, first interview again he'd done in a long time, and he was asked if he would ever take a role in anything again, and he said something like that he would do it if he could do it from the comfort of his own home. Because I think, genuinely, part of the reason, anyway, part of the explanation he gave for leaving acting in 2004 was health reasons. So he'd had heart difficulties and stress. And the interview he gave anyway, he said that he'd basically been advised by doctors not to put his body under the stress that he was doing. I presume, you know, getting into those passionate roles as an actor, it probably does place a bit of stress on the old ticker. So I think it was partially, at least, motivated by health. And I think for that reason, a lot of people sort of thought, nah, this guy's one of the most prolific actors in history. There's no way he'll stay away. And he did. For, you know, over 20 years, quite extraordinary.
And we're seeing pictures there with his wife, Betsy. They married in 1991.
91,
They met at a gym, they fell in love, she became
was
stepmom to his children. And then decided, actually, like you say, we want to have a quiet life. And that feels so removed, doesn't it, from the legacy and the career that he spanned.
And she was a performer as well. She was a classical pianist. So, you know, for the two of them to sort of slip onto the line like that, that was quite interesting. And look, you know, the one thing is you know, he was obviously old in his 90s, but she was 63, which is not enormously old. And look, we have no idea what's happened.
Sure.
We have the statement from the sheriff's office saying that they don't yet know the cause of death, but not suspecting foul play. But it's one of those things you expect a man in his 90s, you know, probably not to have long left in this world. But she was relatively young, I think. So that's quite a shock.
Yeah, a real shock, and adds to the tragedy of this news that has crossed this morning. We're able to bring in now entertainment journalist Caroline Frost. No, not quite yet. Not connected quite yet. I have to say, going back to the style of acting and his very sort of noticeable, always permanent, intense screen presence, is that voice that I really, you know, you really remember cutting through.
Yeah.
Whatever the role was, I guess he couldn't. I haven't seen Ants, but unsurprisingly, you said he played the general.
He did. He would very much exactly.
So
If you had to pick a role,
Yeah.
that's the one he would be. Although he did comedy as well. You know, he's been alongside Robin Williams. You know, he had an extraordinary breadth, as well as playing the sort of gritty westerns, the action hero,
Royal
Crimson Tide, of
Mm-hmm.
course. You know, he also did Get Shorty and a few other sort of much more comedic turns, and he just had an extraordinary breadth. I think at one point in the 70s, he was the most prolific actor in Hollywood. You know, he was hot property. He was doing, I think he did sort of nearly a dozen films in a year in the early 70s. So, you know, he had an extraordinary breadth and ability to turn his hand. And he also did, of course, he was prolific on the stage as well. So a remarkable versatility. And I just, you know, it's one of those, you know, as a sort of child of the 90s, you know, he was one of those faces that I just will always remember, you know, when you sort of start getting into cinema for the very first time. And it just seemed like he was in everything, you know, from Ants on.
And I think that's why he's had such an amazing career. Like you say, Matthew, he goes from comedy, like you say, with huge depth in authenticity in all the roles that he picks. But then, for so many people, they will remember Sunday afternoons. It's very quiet, and you have Superman on in the background, and there's Lex Luthor.
Lex Luthor, absolutely.
And it's part of childhood, isn't it, growing up? And that's why it feels such a shocking thing for us all to sit here and announce, because we feel like these idols will last forever.
I have to confess, you know, I'm not as young as I once was, but as they say, but, you know, quite often famous actors will die, and I'll sort of think, oh, I vaguely knew who that was, but it wasn't really one of my generation. And Gene Hackman very much was, you know, and that hits home, I think. And you start to see these icons of your own life and childhood start to pass away. Just from a personal point of view, is always a bit more impactful, and he's certainly one of them.
Yeah, Crimson Tide definitely was one that I remember very, very
I
clearly.
rewatched it quite recently, actually.
Yeah, great
really
movie.
good film.
Really good film. And again, all about the dialogue, really. Stuck on a...
Well, there's not much else to do.
Yeah, exactly.
They're stuck on a submarine.
But why he kind of fits so well, so well in it. Let's just recap for you the breaking news, if you are just joining us. The news that has crossed in the last few moments that two-time Oscar-winning actor Gene Hackman and his wife Betsy Arakawa were found dead on Wednesday afternoon in their New Mexico home in the United States. That's according to the Santa Fe County Sheriff. The statement coming from the Santa Fe Police Department says, "We are able to confirm that as fact. We do not believe foul play was a factor in their deaths. However, exact cause of death has not been determined at this time." Unexplained circumstances and added tragedy to the news that alongside the 95-year-old Oscar-winning, two-time Oscar-winning actor, 94-year-old Gene Hackman, that his wife, Betsy Arakawa, has passed away as well, as yet unexplained cause of death. And of course, Leah, as you were reflecting on just moments ago, comes just before the Oscars this weekend.
Yeah, and that will, I think, no doubt set the tone for the atmosphere that we'll all see on Sunday going into Monday. But I just think this is remarkable news. This is an icon of Hollywood. And, you know, he first burst onto the scene when he starred in Bonnie and Clyde. What an iconic film.
Every time, just reading the list of films, it's just extraordinary.
I think we're all a bit
the other one that I didn't mention, I don't know if you did before I came on, but Mississippi Burning.
Yes.
You know, that's another phenomenal film that he actually was nominated for an Oscar for that, but didn't win it. But, you know, just film after film of just some of the most iconic instances of cinema over the last few generations.
But you know what's then remarkable? When we're all sitting here blown away by his list of movies, then I think it was in 2004 that he said, you know what, this isn't for me. I need to step back. Perhaps health reasons, and that's completely understandable. But then, along with his wife, led quite a reclusive life, which is, I suppose, unheard of in Hollywood.
Because, you know, actors tend to be people who gravitate to the spotlight, not shy away from it. You know, it is interesting, after a lifetime spent in the limelight, he did slip away. I've actually found the quote actually, this is not the 2004 interview, it's a sort of 2008 interview, where he later sort of confirmed exactly what had happened. He said, "The straw that broke the camel's back was actually a stress test I took in New York, and the doctor advised me that my heart wasn't in the kind of shape that I should be putting it under any stress." So it was heart-related.
But it's amazing testament to the quality and enduring quality of the films he made that he hasn't done anything for over 20 years, and yet still feels like a big part of all of the things we're watching still to this day. I'm really amazed that he retired in 2004. Maybe I wasn't aware that he retired at all, but certainly not 20 years ago.
Yeah, I know, but it's one of those things. He feels still current, even though you know he's 20 years ago. But then that's something I sometimes, it shocks me when people say that, you know, I was born in 2005 and they're a fully fledged adult.
I think that's really important what you say, Wilfred. You were like, actually, I didn't realise that he had stepped away from the limelight, because he didn't make this huge, big announcement that I'm stepping back. So many Hollywood actors that we see, they do that, don't they? He quietly stepped back, citing, actually, this industry is quite stressful. He was an elderly man. He had a back catalogue that I don't think we'll see again. And
maybe at that point you just think, what more is there for me to achieve,
Yeah,
you know? And if
fair
it's
point.
putting my body under this stress, like he had nothing left to prove. He'd won everything there was to win. He'd won Academy Awards
For supporting and lead
Palm
actor.
d'Ors, you know, and you
Over
think, well,
80 films, I'm just
80
reading.
films.
Oh,
yeah,
wow.
that's
And that, of
surprising.
course, is on top of various shows on TV and various stage appearances in the theatre as well. Extraordinary accolade. 80 movies. And, of course, he started in the early 60s, in his 20s, after having been a Marine as well, before that briefly, and continued, I guess, into his 70s if he retired 20 or so years ago and dying at the age of 94. Let's just recap that breaking news for you if you're just joining us once again, that the two-time Oscar-winning actor Gene Hackman and his wife Betsy Arakawa were found dead on Wednesday afternoon in their New Mexico home in Santa Fe County. The Santa Fe County Sheriff has said, "We are able to confirm that as fact. We do not believe foul play was a factor in their deaths. However, exact cause of death has not been determined at this stage." Gene Hackman was 94. His wife, the classical pianist Arakawa, was 63. And they'd married in 1991. And as we've been discussing, retired to a quiet life together after Hackman retired from acting in 2004.
yeah, and there's a statement from Reuters. So he spoke in 2008, and although he didn't have a big fanfare goodbye press conference, as it were, he said, "I haven't held a press conference to announce my retirement, but yes, I'm no longer going to act." And I've been told not to say that over the last few years in case some real wonderful parts come up. So even, you know, to the end, he had that twinkle in his eye. He had that humour, which I think just sums him up.
And he
really
did
as a
some
person.
writing in his later days, so he may have not been on screen, but he wrote a couple of historical fiction novels alongside a sort of, don't know if it was a ghostwriter or a co-writer, but Daniel Lenihan, and then he finally, towards the end, he wrote a couple of solo efforts in his last few years. So he obviously still had the artistic drive. It just wasn't a man who was he was done with his time on stage, and or stage and screen, and whether that was entirely to do with his heart problems or motivation or who knows. But as I say, once you've achieved all that, maybe you've nothing else to prove.
And the heart problems, of course, you're referencing, he'd referred to as one of the reasons why he stepped back from acting in 2004, but we have no indication of a cause of death. Something that is being investigated, though the Santa Fe County Sheriff did say that they did not expect any foul play, as they confirmed the news, the breaking news of this hour, that legendary actor Gene Hackman and his wife have been found dead at their Santa Fe home yesterday afternoon. We're going to continue to bring you more on this breaking story on Sky News Breakfast after a short break.
We are under Israeli military restrictions in terms of some of the things that we can film, but it's important to be in there. What a slow drive for the president as he approaches his golf club. 4 more years! Free wherever you get your news. I'm Mark Stone and I'm Sky's correspondent based here in Washington, D.C.
Good morning to you. It's 9 o'clock. Breaking news this morning. Hollywood legend Gene Hackman and his wife have been found dead in their home in Santa Fe, New Mexico. Leah and Matthew are here to reflect with me on his long career. But first, to bring you up to date on that breaking news from last hour. The 95-year-old two-time Oscar winner, perhaps best known for his role as Lex Luthor in the original Superman films, has died. In a statement on the death, Santa Fe County Sheriff's Office said, "We're able to confirm that they had passed away, excuse me, as fact. We do not believe foul play was a factor in their deaths. However, the cause of death has not yet been determined at this time." Leah and Matthew are with me. And Leah, of course, we don't know the cause of death. We do know the tragic circumstance that he and his wife were both found together, and of course reflecting on his extraordinary career.
Yeah, 2 Oscars, 2 BAFTA awards, 4 Golden Globes, a career that spanned 6 decades. He was born, wasn't he, in 1930, and he enlisted in the army, but this was after lying about his age, serving about 4.5 years. And then he met Dustin Hoffman at a local theatre, and that was the first door opening for him into this incredible career. And I'll just list off a couple of his movies. Of course, for me, personally, his portrayal of Lex Luthor in Superman was incredible and accompanied many Sunday afternoons as a kid growing up. He also, The Enemy of the State, Matthew, my goodness.
Oh, what a film that was.
Incredible film there.
Will Smith.
And it's hard to put into context, really. In later years, he decided that actually the Hollywood fame wasn't for him. He'd achieved everything that he needed to, and in 2004 quietly stepped away from the fame, from the spotlight, saying that, I suppose, he'd done all he needed to do. And I find that testament to character, the type of person that he was.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that what's unusual about it is that you know, from such a public life, both he and his wife Betsy, who was a classical pianist, they sort of retreated into relative obscurity. They left LA, they left the bright lights, and they moved to New Mexico. Now, he gave an interview a few years later, 2008, basically confirming his quiet retirement. He hadn't actually done that. But it was interesting that in that interview, he actually cited health. He said that he'd been told, having done a stress test in New York by a doctor, that effectively the doctor, in his words, advised me that my heart wasn't in the kind of shape that I should be putting it under any stress. So a possible health motive, at least partially, in his retirement from the spotlight. But amazing photographs just published last year of him and his wife Betsy out for lunch in Santa Fe in New Mexico. And I was just reading, it was the first time that they'd been spotted together in public for over 20 years. So they really did leave the spotlight behind. I doubt that was purely motivated by health. But I think we should also caveat that with, you know, although he had talked about heart issues and health issues before, we simply don't know if those had anything to do with the sad news that we've just heard. But it is interesting, that was his initial motivation. But the fact that they stayed away for so long, when many people sort of expected that the draw of Hollywood would lure him back in, I think is remarkable.
Remarkable, but also, as I mentioned earlier, surprising that he had retired at all 20 years ago. I hadn't been aware of that, because I feel like his films are always on still, and his roles are always memorable as well, with that very sort of piercing kind of tone he always has with his roles. We're able to bring in now entertainment journalist Caroline Frost. Caroline, reflect on us on the life and legacy of Gene Hackman. What does his career mean to you?
I think what's interesting is that he sums up an era, because he was the best at the time, when films were both intelligent but also big budget. And so the same films that were massive hits at the cinema were also the ones likely to win awards come Oscars season. And so it's much more split these days. So you get these superheroes and you get the interesting theatre-trained actors. But Gene Hackman was one of that era and that breed who completely bridged the two, which is why I think we remember his performances so centrally. You've mentioned all his greatest hits, The French Connection. He wasn't even a big star when he won all those awards for that lead role, but he just absolutely cemented his status as a leading light of the 1970s cinema and just went from strength to strength. And the other word I would probably use is versatility, because as well as being those kind of criminal masterminds with a glint in his eye, exasperated, always the leader of the pack, he then turned those same skills to comedy. And we saw that in Silver Streak with Richard Pryor. We saw that in Young Frankenstein with Gene Wilder. And he was able to share the limelight and be very effective one half of those two double acts. So I think there was just nothing he couldn't do, which is why when we think of his name, all of us have our favourite. Your colleagues mentioned Lex Luthor. Somebody else will no doubt mention French Connection. Somebody else will mention Young Frankenstein. He means something to everybody.
Caroline, what do you make then of the fact that he did quietly decide to step back from the fame, from the fortune of Hollywood?
I think it was an intelligent move. I think obviously the age was catching up with him. And again, like many actors of those era, he had a hinterland. He'd come from his Marine training. He was already in his 40s by the time he became a big star. So he didn't have young legs on him. But also, the movie industry around him was changing. We had the globalization of the big franchises, of which he was obviously a massive part of the Superman franchise, but they kind of mushroomed probably because of the success of Superman. And that meant that the scripts were not going to be what he was used to and up to meet his skills. I think everything around him changed. He probably, as you said, had done enough. I mean, he had BAFTAs to his name, Golden Globes to his name, 2 Oscar wins. There was nothing else he needed to prove. Money was probably not an issue. Happily married. What's to go out to work for? So off he went and hopefully lived a very long and happy retirement until this sad news today.
And as we've been mentioning, Caroline, retired 20 plus years ago, so in his early 70s he would have been then. Reflect for us on quite what an achievement it is to have been in 80 films. These aren't quick, small budget films either.
No.
And of course it comes on top of his work on stage and on television too. That is an extraordinary number of films.
Oh, it's proper journeyman effort. Yes, it is. I mean, of course, if you're that successful and you come out of the gates with your first big role, we should mention that there were a couple of near misses. So he was offered the role of the youngster in The Graduate, but Mike Nichols, the director, decided he was too young. I think he was also offered, or was one of the near offers, of the lead actor in The Brady Bunch. So this could be a very different career we're talking about. But instead, he persevered. That French Connection really was the handbrake turn. And from then on, he was just the go-to for those intelligent, script-led, writer-led films of the 70s that many of us still hold dear. And we do take it for granted now in this day and age where we've got these huge franchises. So the cinema world is really split now. Big movie, globalized, globally appealing franchises, or a few independent, much smaller budget, interesting films. But back in the day, you had straight down the middle. You had films like Terms of Endearment. You had all of these kind of weepies. You had ones that were actor and writer-led, and they cleaned up at the box office, things like Kramer versus Kramer, Silkwood, and then they also cleaned up at award season. And Gene Hackman was right at the summit of that era. So I think he got lucky with the era that he worked through and just succeeded so well in, and he was the master of his craft.
And Caroline, it's Matthew here. He didn't completely slide off into obscurity. He kept up something of a writing career. I mean, did that have anything like the impact of his films and his acting genius? Was that translated to books?
No, I mean, nobody was going to turn down an invitation to a reading by Gene Hackman, that was for sure. And we've seen this with many people from that era. Again, I keep harking back to how creative they all were. But when you think of somebody, I don't know, I mean, there are other actors who've gone into arts and crafts, who've become painters. I think Dustin Hoffman paints, Michael Douglas paints, Michael Caine paints. They're theatre trained, they're creative spirits, and just because that they've expended their efforts on the big screen, there is obviously something left in the tank. I don't think there's ever going to be a follow-up career to match anything that they achieved on the big screen. I can't think of anybody who's really done that. I mean, Sharon Stone is now painting. It's obviously a thing that a lot of people do, but I hope it just brought him a lot of pleasure. It meant that he could do whatever he wanted. I mean, there was never going to be anything to match those massive hits of the 1970s and 80s, and I don't think he was going to waste his time trying. And it was a case of satisfying his own very personal and subjective creative urges.
And Caroline, this all comes ahead, doesn't it, of the Oscars?
I mean, Cindy, I was thinking about that because a couple of those films now, I mean, Oscars, it's a good year for Oscars. There's a good spread of films. And when we see actors like Ralph Fiennes and his younger, his contemporary Timothée Chalamet, you know, they're people who are bridging the gap between big budget franchises and successful hits, you know, blockbuster hits for all ages, but also doing interesting stuff. And so we're seeing a few successors to the likes of Gene Hackman. But in terms of that era of film, that era has gone. But who knows, with people like Timothée Chalamet and Ralph Fiennes around, perhaps it will live to see another day. I hope so.
In terms of his personal life, just reflect on that for us, Caroline. Clearly, he's been found with his wife, Betsy Arakawa, and they married in the early 90s and as part of this retirement, have had a quiet life together for some 20 years.
Yes, I mean, anything we say at the moment will just be speculation. I mean, obviously, this is a very sad end. It comes after 30 years of marriage. They married in 1991. Gene Hackman had been married before, but he'd, settled down with his life, a very quiet life with animals, a farm, everything you could possibly want. Colorado mountains, you know, it's the stuff dreams are made of. He used to appear in public occasionally in his local areas, cultural events. It was always a lovely delight when he was spotted. But yes, as you say, happy, quiet retirement with his loved ones next to him. Couldn't ask for more. And it was a very happy story until this sad news that's just come in.
Let's just recap what that sad news is that we've been discussing over the last half an hour in terms of the breaking news a few minutes ago that Gene Hackman, the legendary actor, two-time Oscar winner, and his wife, Betsy Arakawa, were found dead yesterday afternoon in Santa Fe in their home. A statement from the Santa Fe County Sheriff's Office said, "We are able to confirm that as fact. We do not believe foul play was a factor in their deaths. However, the exact cause of death has not been determined at this time." We are, of course, waiting for further information, and they've mentioned in their statement that they are carrying out that investigation and waiting a warrant for full entry to the home. Matthew, we've been reflecting on Gene Hackman's extraordinary career, two-time Oscar winner, multiple Golden Globes, two-time BAFTA winner, with some films that stick in the memory loud and clear.
I mean, just that list of, you mentioned 80 films. I mean, when you read down it, when you see that list of films in front of you, it is quite extraordinary. I mean, I'm struggling to think of anyone else who could possibly have featured in quite so many iconic films, from Bonnie and Clyde, which launched him, to the Oscar wins in The French Connection, right through the early 90s, The Unforgiven with Clint Eastwood, a special honourable mention for Ants, which, as I say, is one of my earliest memories of film, animated film. It's just an extraordinary list of films, and what a career. But as you rightly say, Wilf, the fact that he retired over 20 years ago, it just doesn't seem believable, because all of those films still feel so current. I mean, I said I was watching Crimson Tide just the other week. So it feels as though Gene Hackman has been certainly a part of my life for the last 20 years, even if he's not been on screen. I just thought one quote that I've just seen in an interview he gave to Reuters, I think is really illuminating in terms of how he saw his life and career after acting. And he left in 2004. He did then have a brief career as a writer. And he said to Reuters that, "I like the loneliness of writing." Wow. Actually. And I think that says something about a man who was very happy to turn his back on the limelight in Hollywood and spend a very quiet 20, hopefully happy years with his wife in New Mexico.
Interesting use of language as well, to say you like the loneliness as opposed to the isolation, or it's a very interesting choice of word, and people often talk about that. There's different emotions that actors have running through them. A recap of that breaking news for you, that the legendary actor Gene Hackman and his wife Betsy Arakawa were found dead together at their home in Santa Fe. The Santa Fe County Sheriff's Office saying, "We're able to confirm that as fact. We do not believe foul play was a factor in their deaths. However, exact cause of death has not been determined at this time." We're going to continue to keep you up to speed on that breaking news story throughout the morning. We do just want to pivot for a moment and bring you an update on another breaking news story of the morning that we brought you a few hours ago, that the controversial internet personality Andrew Tate and his brother Tristan have left the country and are headed for the United States. Of course, they'd been held in Romania. Let's bring in our Europe correspondent, Siobhan Robbins, who's covered their storyline pretty closely over the last couple of years. What is the latest, Siobhan?
Well, we've heard now confirmed from authorities in Romania that the Tate brothers have left the country. We understand this is because there's been a loosening, I guess you'd explain it as, of the terms under which they are being held. So they were charged in 2022 with a variety of allegations, including human trafficking, and they deny all of the charges. And since then, there's been efforts to try and get them into court. Now, that was delayed in December, but they were continuing to be being held in the country, told they couldn't leave the country. And as I said, there seems to have been some lifting of that to allow them to leave the country. And we are hearing now reports that they are on a plane heading to the US. Now, Andrew and his brother Tristan Tate, of course, huge social media influencers, and they have long had a fan in Donald Trump. They have more than a million followers online, and they are joint UK-US citizens. So it seems that they are heading to the US. And one of the reasons that people are speculating this may have happened is because the Romanian foreign minister, said that they were approached by a Trump official at the Munich Security Conference, which took place here in Germany, to discuss the case. Now, the foreign minister and authorities in Romania say this decision to allow the brothers to travel is not because of pressure being put on them. This is a decision they claim they've made on their own. But of course, people will be speculating about whether this is the long arm of the US putting pressure on the Romanians. But all we know at the moment is we believe that they're heading to the US. This won't be a permanent stay because the rules under which they're being kept means that they have to continue to check in every month. So they will need to be back. But I think they will be celebrating today because they have long been petitioning that they're allowed out of the country. And it will be interesting to see who they meet in the US. So will they be meeting anyone from the administration? Will they simply be going to see people that they know, family, relatives, and that sort of thing? But, will we suddenly see them popping up with Elon Musk, for example, or even with Donald Trump? We simply do not know. All we do know is that these influencers, still charged, are on a flight at the moment back to the US.
Well, and Siobhan, just on that final point, remind us what they are still charged with and where those charges have come, which country's jurisdiction have they stemmed from?
So at the moment, they're being held in Romania over charges of sex trafficking, money laundering, and allegation of rape, all of which, as I said, they deny. This happened due to their arrests in 2022. The brothers were arrested along with two other women, and all of them have consistently denied the charges. And at the beginning of the trial process, where the prosecutors were trying to get this to trial, the brothers, you'll remember, were held. They weren't allowed out. Then there were various petitions that went on to allow them much looser restrictions. This seems to be the latest in that negotiation, that they are actually now allowed to leave the country. But at the same time, we are seeing other investigations going on by other countries. So we've seen, for example, the UK saying that they were launching investigations as well. Obviously, the Romanians are holding them on their own jurisdiction at the moment. This is because they are still trying to get them to court. They are still trying to work on a court case, although that did suffer a setback in December when the court ruled that the prosecutors needed to look at their case due to errors at that point. But there is still this process going on in Romania, and that's why they're being told to return to Romania to fulfil their bail conditions.
Siobhan, thanks so much for that, Siobhan Robbins. We'll still come on the Breakfast Show after a short break. We'll bring you back up to speed with the breaking news of the last hour, that the Oscar winner, legendary actor Gene Hackman and his wife have died in their home in Santa Fe. We'll be speaking to film journalist Karen Krzyzanowicz next.
The town famous for a fake grooming scandal
I did not leave the house for about 3 years.
had a secret that until recently wasn't known.
Barrow got branded to be a lie in town. It's not. Grooming was happening here.
There were other liars in this town with other secrets.
She is naming men who go on to be convicted of offences against other women and girls.
Prime Minister Modi is the most popular politician in the country. He is expected to win his third term in these elections.
Jubilation in the streets, while some emotional.
This is a political victory for Prime Minister Modi and his Hindu Nationalist Party, a promise fulfilled. I'm Neville Lazarus and I'm Sky's reporter based in Delhi.
He paid over 50,000 to traffickers to get him to America. Instead, he was kidnapped, tied up, and threatened by smugglers. A commando from the state force walks me through to a Mai Tai village on the front line.
Firing the civilian and they're burning our house.
We cross to the opposite side, held by the cookies.
When they fire, we have to retaliate.
Sky News get the full story first. Companies like these are helping India in its trajectory to be a serious player in space exploration.
The enthusiasm is palpable. The young desire change.
These elections are a pivotal moment for the country's economic and political history. The concern here is that the public healthcare system is inadequate.
In a prayer, she's asking God to help understand what happened. I cannot carry on. God, help me. He says his world has crashed. Like him, there are scores of families searching for their loved ones.
Too often have families endured such tragedies for the negligence not only by the administration, but also by spiritual people in this country. Free wherever you get your news. Even though it has few seats in Parliament, Kashmir is symbolic and very significant. It's often been called a nuclear flashpoint.
We're rolling.
Welcome to the world.
Our new podcast, starting now. It's very exciting. Every week, we'll be reporting from the world's trouble spots.
We get to hold those in positions of power accountable, and we get to ask the questions that the audience, the listeners, want to know about.
And that's why it is so important that people tune in, come along for the road, come along for the journey. It'll be fun.
Sky News get the full story first. Is this now all your territory?
Yeah.
The battlefield is outside the barricades. We are in the middle of a forest, in a jungle really, and they're attempting to keep these men alive. I'm Stuart Ramsey, and I'm Sky's chief correspondent. It's really dangerous. Many people have died riding it.
Welcome back. Wanted to recap our breaking news this morning that two-time Oscar-winning actor Gene Hackman and his wife Betsy Arakawa were found dead on Wednesday afternoon in their New Mexico home in the United States. Well, in a statement, the Santa Fe County Sheriff has said, "We are able to confirm that as fact. We don't believe foul play was a factor in their deaths. However, exact cause of death has not been determined at this time." The county sheriff has said they are waiting a full investigation and indeed for a warrant for full entry into the home. But that news has crossed in the last hour or so. And guys, we've been reflecting on the great tragedy as well, not just that this legend of Stage and Screen has gone, but that he's gone alongside his wife and that we don't know the circumstances of that. And Matthew, of course, Hackman in his 90s, Arakawa just 63.
Yes, I mean, I think that's the notable thing, and you're right to preface it with, you know, we simply don't know and we shouldn't speculate. But, you know, a man of 95, you might expect possibly to be, you know, nearing the end, sadly. But, you know, Betsy Arakawa is still relatively young at 63. So, look, we must wait further details from the police. But there is time, I think, to reflect on what an extraordinary career the man had. You know, 80 films, going right back to the end of the 60s when he sort of burst onto the scene in Bonnie and Clyde, 2 Academy Awards, BAFTAs, Golden Globes, Screen Actors Guild Awards, Pam's Door. I don't know what the plural of Pam Door. But, you know, extraordinary, literally glittering career, and yet retired 20 years ago. But as you rightly said, well, it doesn't seem that way at all, because those films are still on all the time. I watched Crimson Tide just the other week, you know, and he still has felt a part of my life, even though he hasn't actually appeared in anything for over 20 years.
Let's just enjoy a clip of one of those films that many of us remember, which was him in the role of Lex Luthor in Superman.
Everything on this side of the line is just hundreds and hundreds of miles of worthless desert land, which just so happens to be owned by Lex Luthor Incorporated. Now, call me foolish, call me irresponsible. It occurs to me that a 500-megaton bomb planted at just the proper point would destroy most of California.
Millions of innocent people would be killed. The West Coast, as we know it, would
fall into the sea. Bye-bye, California. Hello, new West Coast, my West Coast.
Gene Hackman there as Lex Luthor in Superman, one of the many spectacular film roles he played, Leah, that dates back to the 60s.
Yeah, I mean, incredible. And that clip there, playing Lex Luthor, of course, in all the comic books, Lex Luthor was bald.
I was just about to say.
But Gene Hackman refused to wear a bald cap. And so what he suggested instead... Or shave his head, of course. He decided that an ill-fitting wig was much better to imply baldness. So, you know, layering on a backstory for a character, which I think was really key to the legacy of someone like Gene Hackman, from comedy pivoting to, you know, an evil character like Lex Luthor, to so many fantastic films. And then if you dial back to his beginnings, you know, he was this 16-year-old that enlisted in the military, lying about his age so he could be part of the action and serve his country, training as a broadcast journalist. So he was always at the centre of communicating, storytelling with so many people. And I think that's why he's captured decade-long adoration, as Matthew said, a glittering career. That he quietly stepped away from in 2004. He did not have this big press conference and fanfare, but just stepped away, reflecting on a career where he achieved so much. 2 Oscars, 2 BAFTAs, 4 Golden Globes. I mean, it's quite staggering, actually.
It really is. It really is. Let's bring in Karen Krasanovic, the film journalist. Sum up this career for us, Karen. What did Gene Hackman achieve?
Well, Gene Hackman was an actor of renown. He wouldn't take just any role. He turned down a lot of very, very plum roles in big films, very choosy, but always had a quality, a sense of center that the best actors have. When the real thing that Gene Hackman had, when he was on the screen, you couldn't take your eyes off him. And whatever he played, you completely believed, whether it was Lex Luthor with his tongue in his cheek, or I mean, he was great at comedy as well as drama. Think about him in Young Frankenstein as the blind shepherd. Just an incredible, incredible actor, and much missed when he retired.
And you mentioned that you couldn't take your eyes off him. You couldn't not listen to him either, could you? I mean, that voice was so intense and brilliant.
He was an extraordinary performer in all ways, vocally, physically. I mean, don't forget he was also on stage on Broadway for quite a while, did summer stock, and he'd been honing his craft for his entire life. after studying, as you mentioned previously, broadcast journalism. He would just seem to have a sense of what a good role was for him, not what the director thought or not what the producer thought, but what he felt he could do best at.
And Karen, you know, 2 Oscars we spoke about. He won the first one, didn't he, for his role in The French Connection, up there as one of his greatest ever films.
Popeye Doyle, that's right, and unforgettable. If you haven't seen The French Connection, go and get it now, because it is a performance that is just lingered. No matter how old it is, it just lingers in the memory, and it affects current films today. People are always referring back to that when they're making films today. They're going, like French Connection, like Gene Hackman.
We also have a clip which we can enjoy, Karen, of him in Unforgiven.
Wonderful.
Enemies, Bob. You've been talking about the Queen again? On Independence Day?
Easy.
I guess you think I'm kicking you, Bob.
That was, of course, The Unforgiven, not The Firm. Karen, I mean, prolific in many, many decades. It's hard really to pin down which of the decades he excelled in most of all.
I mean, that was a wonderful clip. I'm so glad you showed Unforgiven, because it's a great revisionist Western. And I love that he goes, you know, don't talk about the Queen on Independence Day. You know, I mean, it's very clever, and what a great delivery. Yes, I mean, it's difficult to find his best decade. And he was wonderful in the 60s, Bonnie and Clyde. He was terrific in the 70s. Don't forget, he was in The Poseidon Adventure as well, which is a great film to watch at New Year's, and just had a wonderful range. But it shows, if you look at his awards, let's look at the Oscar nominations, Bonnie and Clyde, I Never Sang for My Father, French Connection, Mississippi Burning, and Unforgiven. A huge range of genre, but also very selective. You know, he doesn't have the packed CV of, let's say, Donald Pleasance or any other actor. He was very, very selective, and I think that's why he lingers in our memory for these potent roles.
Matthew here, I'm just going to jump in with a counterintuitive question. He was also in some dreadful films. I'm just looking at some of the scores that some of his films got on Rotten Tomatoes. You know, Loose Cannons gets a 0%. Welcome to Mooseport, his last film, gets 13%. But I suppose the point I'm making is he was in dreadful films, but still managed to shine through as a brilliant character in some of those films. And in some ways, that's a mark of a great actor, right?
Yeah, well, you shouldn't be on Rotten Tomatoes, okay? Get off, see them yourself, is what I say.
Sites are available.
But it's often a film that tanks. Let's say the marketing isn't good, it's released at the wrong time, or it's just not a good film. It's not entertaining. It doesn't do what we want it to do. It doesn't mean that the work isn't great. And if you look at any of the BAFTA winners or the BAFTA nominees even this year, there are films there with that maybe haven't caught the imagination, but have tremendous performances. And I don't think Gene Hackman ever put in a bad performance.
Matthew's showing good balance by bringing up some of the less successful films there. Let's enjoy now a clip from one of the greats. You've already reflected on it for us, but let's have a little clip from French Connection.
All right, Popeye's here. Get your hands on your heads. Get off the bar and get on the wall. Come on, move. Move. Come on, sweetheart, move. Come on, move out. All right, come on. Hands face the window. Move. Face the wall. Turn around there. Turn around. Move. Come on, move. Hands out of your pockets. Turn around. Turn around. Come on, you heart. Come on. Turn around, big man. Come on, turn around. Get on the wall. Get on. Turn around. Get him up. Turn around. Hey, you drop that. Pick it up. Hands up. Pick it up. Come on, move. What are you looking at? All right, bring it here. Get your hands out of your pockets. What's my name?
Doyle.
What?
Mr. Doyle.
Come here. You pick your feet. You get over there. Get your hands on your head.
Karen, tell our viewers that might not know, what was that film about and why was it so significant, particularly, of course, for Hackman?
Well, it was extremely successful. They actually made a sequel, which back then was unusual. It was about a cop that, well, it's quite a cliche now, but it was about a cop who broke the rules to get things done. Now we look at that and we think, oh, we've seen that on television series forever, but that was new at the time. That was shocking at the time, and we had all this respect for our institutions. And Gene Hackman brought that energy, and also he doesn't look like a tough guy. He's got a receding hairline, and he's got little eyes, and you just think, well, he's not a hero, but he just embodied it. He didn't need the movie star looks. It was his force of personality, his charisma, his ability to give us the energy on the screen that really made us want to watch that film over and over and over again.
Karen, thanks so much for joining us this morning on this breaking news, this sad breaking news. We appreciate your input for us this morning. Just before we move on to another bit of breaking news for you, we just recap for you that headline that the legendary actor, two-time Oscar winner, and his wife, Gene Hackman, have died. The Hollywood legend was found with his wife in their Santa Fe home in New Mexico. A statement from the Santa Fe County Sheriff's Office said, "We are able to confirm that as fact. We do not believe foul play was a factor in their deaths. However, exact cause of death has not been determined at this point." Of course, more on that throughout the morning. The Santa Fe Sheriff's Office saying they are carrying out a full investigation, but as we said, no foul play is suspected on their part.